The ship was old, but its purpose was timeless. Silas called her the Stygian Drift, a reclamation vessel designed for one of the Terran hegemony's least glorious tasks, auditing the past. He was an auditor, a title that sounded far more official than the reality of his work. In truth, he was a janitor at the edge of known space, dispatched to the closets and forgotten corners where Earth had swept its failures. His job was to find these messes, catalog them, and tag them for sterilization. He didn't carry the fire himself. Other, cleaner ships did that. He was just the man who checked the box, the final, cold signature on a death warrant written a century before he was born. His cockpit was a sterile bubble of recycled air and muted gray composites, a stark contrast to the stellar chaos bleeding through the forward viewport. A new directive blinked on his central console, a single, sterile line of text that cut through the silence. Audit assignment, veiled asset X734, containment. Field failure detected. Assess and confirm cleansing protocol, viability. He felt the familiar, dull thud of routine settle in his gut. A veiled planet. Another ghost from the hegemony's reckless expansion era. A time when Earth flung colony ships at any rock that could theoretically hold an atmosphere, seeding the galaxy with hope and, more often than not, failure. When a colony went dark, when a terraforming project went monstrously wrong, or when a political experiment became an embarrassment, the hegemony didn't send rescue parties. It sent the veil, a shroud of shimmering energy and distorted space-time. It would wrap around a world, hiding it from scanners, from history, from memory itself. Out of sight, out of mind. But nothing lasts forever, not even the shame of a star-spanning empire. Silas plotted the coordinates, his hands moving with an economy of motion honed by years of solitude. X734 was a name from a dead ledger, a world veiled over 150 years ago. The file was sparse, almost insultingly so. Project Chimera. Objective accelerated atmospheric terraforming using experimental biocatalysts. Status catastrophic ecosystem collapse. Asset loss imminent. Veil protocol enacted. That was it. No mention of the 10,000 souls aboard the colony ship Arcadia. No details on what catastrophic ecosystem collapse truly meant. The hegemony was thorough in its erasure. To them, the people on the Arcadia were no longer human. They were a biological contamination, a failed investment to be written off. Silas felt no pity. Pity was a liability in his line of work. He was a function, a tool of hegemony policy. And the policy was simple. The past must not be allowed to infect the present. He guided the Stygian Drift toward the anomaly, a faint ripple in the fabric of space where the veil was fraying at the edges. The journey was a silent one, measured in nutrient pace meals and diagnostic checks. He didn't dream of the worlds he condemned. He dreamed of the silence between them, the perfect, clean void that was his only true home. Breaking through the veil was like punching through oil-slicked glass. The ship shuddered, alarms screaming as reality reasserted itself with violent turbulence. The pristine starscape vanished, replaced by a sky the color of a day-old bruise, choked with roiling, sickly yellow clouds. Below, the planet was a nightmare canvas of impossible colors and tormented geography, jagged spires of crystalline rock, easily miles high, clawed at the storm-racked heavens, pulsing with a faint, internal light. The forests weren't green, but a deep, spectral violet, and the rivers flowed not with water, but with something thick and silver, like mercury. This was what catastrophic collapse looked like. His sensors went wild, struggling to categorize atmospheric compounds that shouldn't exist and energy readings that defied physics. He was supposed to land at the source of the containment breach, the epicenter of the Veil's decay. He expected to find a crater, the radioactive ghost of a failed reactor, or perhaps the ruins of a colony reclaimed by a hostile environment. He did not expect to find a town. It was nestled in a deep canyon, sheltered from the worst of the perpetual gales by the towering crystal spurs. It wasn't a town of clean hegemony prefabs, but a sprawling, organic creation. Buildings were fused into the canyon walls, carved from the glowing rock itself. Walkways were woven from the purple, vine-like trees, and the entire settlement was interconnected, a single living structure. At its heart, impossibly, lay the skeletal remains of a colony ship, the Arcadia, its hull cracked open and repurposed, its spine now the central pillar of this strange civilization. A plume of wood smoke, or something like it, curled into the toxic air. They were alive. His jaw tightened. This wasn't in the file. Survivors complicated things. Survivors had faces. He brought the Stygian drift down on a flat, rocky mesa overlooking the settlement, the landing struts groaning as they settled. The moment his engines died, the silence that rushed in was alien. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the hum of the glowing rocks and the distant howl of the wind. Before his ramp had fully lowered, they were there. Figures emerged from the shadows of the canyon, moving with a startling, silent grace. They weren't monsters. They were human, clad in tough, woven fabrics and armor pieced together from the planet's strange minerals and old ship plating. They carried weapons, long rifles that looked part scavenger tech, part artisanal craft. Their leader stepped forward, a woman with gray streaked hair pulled back tight from a face etched with the hardships of this world. Her eyes, a pale, piercing gray, held no fear, only a weary and profound vigilance. She carried no weapon, but she was by far the most dangerous person there. "You are a long way from home," she said, her voice raspy but clear, carrying easily in the thin air. It was perfect Terran standard, an accent frozen in time. "My home is wherever the hegemony sends me," Silas replied, his voice flat, his hand resting near the sidearm holstered on his thigh. He stood on the ramp, making no move to descend fully. "This is a restricted sector. I'm here to conduct an audit." The woman gave a short, bitter laugh. "An audit? That's what they call it now. When our grandparents screamed for help as the sky caught fire, they called it quarantine. You're here to see if the experiment is finally over." "The experiment failed," Silas stated, the words tasting like ash. "My orders are to confirm the planet is sterile." Her gaze swept over the armed people flanking her, then back to him. "As you can see, it is not. My name is Ilara. I am the speaker for this settlement, for the children of the Arcadia. We have survived the collapse, the silence, and the sky. We will survive you. This was wrong. All of it. They weren't supposed to be defiant. They were supposed to be broken, desperate remnants, begging for the mercy of a clean death. Instead, he was facing a woman who spoke of survival as a weapon. "I'm not here to fight," he said, a half-truth. "No." Ilara agreed, her eyes narrowing. "You are here to judge, to measure our suffering against a checklist, and then call down the wire to wipe the slate clean. We know what an auditor is." A tense truce was negotiated, not with words, but with the shared understanding that a firefight would benefit no one. Silas was a single man against a town, but he had a starship in orbit, a direct line to the fleet that would follow. They had the numbers, but they were trapped on a dying world. He was allowed into the settlement, an escort of 2 silent guards shadowing his every move. He began the audit, his helmet's internal sensors recording everything: air quality, radiation levels, local biology. But the most important data couldn't be measured in numbers. He walked their woven streets, watching people work. They moved with a purpose that felt ancient. They tended to glowing fungal gardens that pulsed with soft light, providing both food and illumination. They drew the silvery liquid from the rivers, running it through complex filtration systems salvaged from the Arcadia's life support. Children, their faces smudged with dirt, but their eyes bright and curious, watched him from doorways, whispering to each other. They had been born here, in this beautiful, lethal cage. This was the only home they had ever known. He spent the evening with Ilara in the hollowed-out command deck of the old ship, which now served as a council chamber. Maps of the surrounding territory, drawn on stretched hides, covered the old, dead consoles. "You call our world a failure," she said, her voice low as she gestured to the maps. "And you are not wrong. The Chimera catalysts were meant to create a paradise. Instead, they shattered the world's climate and rewrote its biology. The first generation died by the thousands. They died of the air, the water, the very soil beneath their feet." She paused, her gaze distant. But they didn't all die. Some of them adapted. Or maybe the world adapted them. We learned to breathe the thin air, to draw nutrients from plants that would kill an off-worlder. We learned to read the storms in the hum of the crystals. She looked at him directly, her gray eyes seeming to see right through his uniform, through his training. "The veil didn't just hide us from you. It stabilized the environment. It was a pressure cooker, holding the chaos of this world in a delicate balance. Now it is failing. The storms grow worse. The ground shakes more often. The light in the crystals is dimming." The truth of his mission settled on him then, a weight heavier than any G-force. Earth wasn't coming to punish them for being weak. They were coming to erase a mistake, to sterilize a lab report. These people, in their impossible resilience, were an unacceptable variable. They proved that life, human life, could thrive outside the hegemony's sterile control. They were a heresy written in flesh and blood. "So you're not just survivors," Silas heard himself say. "You're a new kind of human. We are what the hegemony made us." Ilara corrected him, her voice hard as stone. "And now you are here to unmake us." Later that night, Silas sat alone in the cockpit of his lander, the door sealed against the alien world. The data from his audit streamed across his console: atmospheric toxins, geological instability, biosignature variances. It was more than enough to justify the cleansing protocol. He could file the report right now, transmit the data packet, and be gone before morning. He could leave these people to their fate, to be devoured by their own dying world before the hegemony's sterilizing fleets ever arrived. It was the logical choice, the safe choice. It was his job. On the screen, a prompt blinked, simple and absolute. Preliminary report required. Confirm biological contamination. Affirm cleansing protocol. Readiness Wien. He looked through the reinforced viewport. The settlement below was a small constellation of soft, warm light against the immense, violent darkness of the canyon. He could see figures moving, families gathering for their evening meal. He saw a child chase a small, phosphorescent insect through a fungal garden. Beyond the canyon's edge, a storm was gathering, a colossal vortex of yellow cloud and jagged lightning that dwarfed anything he had ever seen. The planet was coming for them. He thought of Ilara's eyes, not pleading, but challenging. "We will survive you." His hand hovered over the console, his finger trembling just slightly. The cursor blinked, a cold, indifferent heartbeat, waiting for his judgment. He was just a janitor, here to sweep up a mess. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what was the mess, and what was the thing worth saving. The blinking cursor was an ultimatum, a simple binary choice presented as bureaucratic procedure, a distillation of 150 years of silence into a single, damning question. Silas felt the immense, crushing gravity of the hegemony behind that light. An empire built on the principle that loose ends were cauterized, not tied. To press "we" was to follow a lifetime of training, to be the efficient tool he was designed to be. To press N was insanity, an act of rebellion so profound it would not only get him killed, but would also guarantee the very fire he was trying to prevent would rain down on this world with vindictive speed. He did neither. His fingers, steady and precise, moved across the console, accessing a submenu buried deep within the audit protocol. A dusty, rarely used clause for exceptional circumstances. He typed a single, concise sentence: anomaly detected. Survivor population exhibits unforeseen environmental adaptation. Standard sterilization protocol may be insufficient. Requesting extended observation period per Subdirective 7, atypical biological persistence. It was a lie wrapped in the language of truth, a bureaucrat's gambit. He wasn't questioning the morality of the order. He was questioning its efficiency, the one sin the hegemony could not forgive. He hit send. The reply was almost instantaneous, stripped of all pleasantries. Subdirective 7, request denied. Data is sufficient. Your judgment is not required. Comply. Final warning. A cold knot formed in his stomach. He had played his only card, and the house had rejected it. But then, a second message blinked through from a different, higher priority channel, a channel he hadn't seen active in years. Priority override. Marshal Korvac. Extended observation granted. You have 72 Terran Standard Hours. Transmit conclusive findings by deadline. Your life depends on the clarity of your report. No further communication will be authorized. Silas stared at the name. Marshal Korvac. The man was a ghost, a legend from the hegemony's internal security forces, infamous for his purges of dissenting sectors. His intervention wasn't a reprieve, it was a leash. He hadn't been given time, he had been given a countdown. With the weight of those 72 hours pressing down on him, Silas descended once more into the canyon settlement. This time, he didn't wait on the ramp. He walked into the heart of their world, his helmet retracted, breathing the thin, metallic air that now felt less like a poison and more like a test. Ilara met him near the repurposed hull of the Arcadia, her expression unreadable. "You have not left," she observed. "It was not a question. My audit is incomplete," he said, the lie feeling more solid now. "I need to understand how you survived." A young man stepped out from behind her. his face a mask of barely contained fury. He was lean and hard, his knuckles scarred, and he held a long, crystal-tipped spear with the casual deadliness of a predator. "He doesn't want to understand," the young man snarled, his eyes locked on Silas. "He wants to find a better way to kill us. A poison for our water, a frequency to shatter the crystals. We should have put his head on a spike the moment he landed. Ilara, that is enough." "Kyle!" Ilara's voice was quiet, but it cut through his anger like a razor. She turned back to Silas, her gaze unwavering. "Kale speaks for many. They see the hegemony in your eyes. They see the end. If you want answers, you will have to earn them. Show us you are more than just the ghost at our door." Silas spent the next day following them, observing, recording. He was a shadow in their world, watching as Kyle led a hunting party up the treacherous canyon walls, their movements fluid and certain on surfaces his own grav boots would have struggled with. They weren't hunting animals, they were harvesting. They used resonating strikers to tap the giant crystal spires, causing fist-sized chunks to shear off, which they caught in woven nets. Back in the settlement, these crystals were ground into a fine, luminescent dust that was mixed with the fungal paste, a vital mineral supplement. He watched their medics treat a child who had fallen, not with antiseptic and Bacta-patches, but with a poultice made from the silvery river mud, which seemed to cauterize the wound and numb the pain instantly. Everything they did was a testament to their adaptation, a living rebuttal to the hegemony's sterile report. They hadn't just survived, they had intertwined with the planet's bizarre ecosystem, becoming a part of its strange and violent life cycle. He felt a grudging respect, a feeling his training had tried to excise from his very DNA, but respect was not data. It would not satisfy Marshal Korvac. He needed something more, something concrete. He needed a reason. The reason came not from the people, but from the world itself. It began as a low hum, a vibration that started in the soles of his feet and worked its way up his spine. The soft, internal light of the canyon walls began to flicker, then pulse with a frantic, a rhythmic intensity. The colonists stopped what they were doing, their faces turning upward, their expressions a mixture of dread and grim resignation. "It is a resonance cascade," Ilara shouted over the rising thrum. "The ground is unstable. Get to the core." The entire planet seemed to be screaming. The hum rose in pitch to a high-frequency shriek, a sound of tearing metal and splitting stone that vibrated in his teeth. Fissures spider-webbed across the ground, and the silvery river began to bubble and steam. Silas's suit sensors went haywire, warning of massive seismic activity and a spike in ambient energy that was off the charts. People were running, a controlled, practiced panic, moving toward the central pillar of the Arcadia. Kyle was at the forefront, directing people, his earlier animosity forgotten in the face of the shared threat. Then, a section of the upper canyon wall gave way. A landslide of glowing rock and purple foliage cascaded down, directly toward a section of the settlement that housed the filtration systems and a small dwelling where a family was trapped, their exit blocked by a collapsed walkway. Silas didn't think, he acted. While the colonists' instincts were to run for shelter, his were to analyze and intercept. His suit's tactical display highlighted the trajectory of the landslide, calculating its impact point. It was too big to stop, but not too big to divert. "Ilara," he yelled, pointing toward a massive and freestanding crystal spire near the filtration units. "The harmonics, if we can shatter that spire. The shockwave might push the slide sideways. It was a wild gamble, based on a half-formed theory about the planet's resonant geology. Kale overheard him, his face streaked with dust. Shatter it with what? Auditor harsh language, but Ilara's eyes met Silas's, and she saw the desperate logic in his plan. She nodded once. Do it. He drew his sidearm. A standard hegemony-issue pulse pistol. It was a weapon, but it was also a tool. He adjusted the power output to maximum and fired. Not at the landslide, but at the base of the towering crystal. The first shot did nothing, the energy dissipating into the glowing rock with a dull thud. He fired again, and again, creating a sustained energy loop. Kal, seeing his intent, let out a sharp cry and hurled his crystal-tipped spear with impossible force and accuracy. It struck the exact point where Silas's energy bolts were impacting. The combination of thermal stress and kinetic shock was the key. A spiderweb of fractures erupted from the impact point, and with a final deafening shriek, the massive crystal spire exploded into 1 billion points of light. The resulting shockwave was a physical blow, a wall of force and sound that slammed into the landslide, pushing the tons of rock and debris sideways. It still hit the edge of the settlement, crushing several smaller structures, but the vital filtration systems and the trapped family were spared. The cascade ended as quickly as it began. The shrieking subsided, the ground stilled, and a fine, glowing dust settled over everything like snow. The silence that followed was broken by the cries of the injured and the shouts of rescuers. Silas stood panting, his ears ringing, the pulse pistol hot in his hand. Kyle approached him, his face grim, his earlier hostility replaced by a raw, complex mixture of shock and suspicion. "You saved them," he said, the words sounding like they were being pulled from him against his will. "You also brought the sky down on us. One does not cancel the other." He turned and began organizing a rescue party, leaving Silas alone with Ilara amidst the dust and ruin. She looked at the damage, then at him. "You are full of surprises, Auditor," she said softly. "You think like the storm." Her gaze was intense, searching. "What did you see on your sensors just before the cascade?" He checked his suit's logs, the data still scrolling. A massive energy buildup, originating deep underground. A localized spike, almost like a power source cycling up, then failing. He looked from his display to the skeletal frame of the Arcadia. A thought struck him, cold and sharp. The ship's logs, the colony reports. The hegemony would have wiped the primary records, but a colony ship of that class had redundant, shielded data cores buried deep within the engineering section. They were designed to survive catastrophic failure, to be a black box for an autopsy that never came, if there was any record of what Project Chimera really was, or what power source could cause a geological event of that magnitude. It would be in there. He had come here to audit them, but now he realized the most important evidence wasn't in their blood or the air they breathed. It was in the bones of the ship that had brought their ancestors to this beautiful, terrible grave. He had less than 2 days to find it, and in doing so, he might just find a truth more dangerous than the hegemony's cleansing fire. The path to the Arcadia's engineering core was a descent into a mechanical tomb. Ilara guided him, her light staff casting dancing shadows across corridors tilted at impossible angles, their walls scarred by the initial crash and a century and a half of geological stress. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and cold, dead metal. Kyle followed them, his silence a heavy, palpable presence at their backs. He had not argued against this expedition, but his mistrust radiated from him like heat. To him, Silas was still the fox asking for a tour of the henhouse, and this descent was a fool's errand born of Ilara's dangerous optimism. They reached a series of blast doors, warped and fused shut by the impact. "The core is beyond here," Ilara said, running a hand over the cold steel. "We have never been able to open them. The mechanisms are dead, and the metal is too dense to cut with our tools." Silas scanned the doors with his suit's diagnostic tools. The external power conduits were severed, but the internal locking mechanisms were intact, powered by an independent, long-life capacitor. There was a maintenance port, sealed and nearly invisible. "I can open it," he said, pulling a multi-tool from his belt. "But it will trigger every automated security alert in this section. The ship's central AI may be dead, but the subsystems, they might not be." Kale scoffed. "More ghosts. This ship is a corpse. Auditor, do what you must." With a surgeon's precision, Silas interfaced with the port. The multi-tool whirred, cycling through command codes that hadn't been used since before this world was veiled. A low, groaning sound echoed through the corridor as ancient gears turned for the first time in generations. The blast doors shuddered, then slowly, tortuously, scraped open a few feet, just enough for them to slip through. The engineering section was a cathedral of silence and shadow. Massive, dormant engines loomed like forgotten gods, draped in the spectral violet vines that had crept in through cracks in the hull. A thick layer of luminescent dust coated every surface, giving the cavernous space an ethereal, dreamlike quality. At the heart of it all was the shielded data core, a monolithic black cylinder, its surface perfectly clean, untouched by the decay around it. As Silas approached it, a soft, blue light began to pulse from a panel on its side, and a voice, synthesized and unnervedly calm, filled the space. "Security breach detected. Unidentified biological signature present. Please state your authorization code." Kyle froze, his spear held ready. Ilara's hand went to the hilt of a long knife at her belt. "What is that?" she whispered. "The ship's watchman." Silas answered, his eyes fixed on the core. "A subroutine AI. It calls itself Warden." He stepped forward, his own voice steady. "Auditor Silas, Hegemony Reclamation Corps, authorization code Sigma 97 Blue." The AI paused for a full 10 seconds, the silence stretching taut. "Authorization accepted. Auditor Silas, your code is outdated. Welcome to the Arcadia. Report all primary systems are offline. Life support is critical. The hull is compromised. The crew is absent. I have been alone for 147 standard years. It is good to hear a voice." The synthetic voice was laced with something Silas had never heard from an AI before, a faint, unmistakable trace of loneliness. "Warden," Silas began, "I need access to the logs. Specifically, all records pertaining to Project Chimera and the ship's primary power source before the crash." "Accessing," the AI replied. "The files are heavily encrypted, sealed under a black quill directive from Hegemony High Command. Such a directive requires marshal-level clearance to unseal. You do not possess such clearance." A dead end. Silas felt a surge of frustration. He was so close. Override the directive. Warden, this is a matter of planetary security. There is an active and unstable power source on this world that is causing seismic events. I believe it is connected to the project. My apologies. Auditor, Warden said, its tone flatly polite. I cannot bypass a Black Quill directive. To do so would be a violation of my core programming. The penalty for such a violation is self-termination. Kyle stepped forward, his patience finally snapping. Then you are useless to us, a ghost guarding a graveyard. He slammed the butt of his spear against the data core's housing, the impact echoing loudly in the silent chamber. Aggressive behavior detected. Warden stated calmly, "Please refrain from striking my housing. It is quite sensitive." But Kale's action had jarred something loose, not in the AI, but in Silas's memory. Core programming. Every hegemony AI was built on a foundation of inviolable laws, but those laws were hierarchical. Warden, Silas said slowly, an idea forming. What is your primary directive, your absolute core purpose? Above all others, my primary directive is the preservation of the Arcadia colony and the successful fulfillment of its mission objectives. And what were those objectives Silas pressed? Objective 1. Deliver 10,000 colonists to Veiled Asset X-734. Objective 2. Execute Project Chimera. Objective 3. Ensure the long-term survival and viability of the human colony. Silas's heart hammered against his ribs. Warden, the colonists are still alive. Their descendants are living on this world. But the planet is unstable. These resonance cascades are becoming more frequent, more violent. If they continue, they will shatter this world and kill everyone here. The colony will fail. You will fail your primary directive. A long, profound silence followed. The blue light on the core pulsed faster and faster. Silas could almost feel the logical conflict raging within the AI's processes, the unbreakable law of a Black Quill directive warring against the even more fundamental command to protect the colony. Processing. Contradiction detected. Warden finally said, its voice now strained, flickering with digital static. Directive 3, preservation of the colony, takes precedence. If the colony is at risk of annihilation, all other subdirectives, including information security protocols, are rendered secondary. Acknowledged. Unsealing Black Quill files. Be warned. Auditor, some truths are not meant for the light. Schematics and data streams flooded the air around them. Holographic projections that filled the engineering bay with ghosts of the past. They saw the original plans for Project Chimera. It wasn't just an atmospheric terraforming project. It was a geoengineering project of unprecedented and monstrous ambition. The hegemony wasn't just trying to change the air. They were trying to change the planet itself. From the core outwards, the biocatalysts weren't just microbes. They were a form of programmable, self-replicating nanite designed to break down the planet's crust and reforge it into something more suitable for human life. But the centerpiece of the project was the power source. They hadn't used a standard fusion reactor. They had found something on this world, something ancient, buried deep beneath the surface, a vast, crystalline, geological structure that exhibited properties of a naturally occurring quantum reactor. The hegemony didn't build a power source. They tried to harness one. They called it the heart. The logs detailed their catastrophic failure. The heart was not a dead, passive thing. It was semi-sentient, a vast, slow consciousness of crystal and energy. When they tried to tap into it, it responded not with compliance, but with a violent, uncontrolled surge of power that shattered the planet's delicate equilibrium. The Chimera nanites, flooded with energies they were not designed to handle, went haywire, rewriting the planet's biology into the beautiful, lethal nightmare it was today. The Arcadia was caught in the initial energy wave, its systems fried, and it crashed. The Veil wasn't deployed to hide a simple colony failure. It was deployed to contain a geopolitical bomb, to hide the fact that the hegemony had tried to enslave a living world and had failed, creating a planetary-scale weapon of unimaginable power in the process. The resonance cascades weren't random quakes. They were the planet's heartbeats, the slow, pained breaths of a wounded god. And, according to Warden's finalist terrifying projection, they were getting stronger because the heart was dying. The hegemony's tampering had mortally wounded it, and its death throes would be a final cataclysmic cascade that would tear the planet apart. Warden calculated the final event would occur in less than a standard month. Cleansing fleets were irrelevant. They were all living on borrowed time. Kyle stared at the projections, his face pale, his anger finally extinguished and replaced with a profound, soul-deep horror. Our whole lives, we've been living on the back of a dying beast. Ilara was silent, her hand pressed against the cold metal of the Arcadia's hull, as if she could feel the planet's pain through it. Silas looked at the countdown timer Warden had projected into the air. He had less than 24 of his 72 hours left. He had come here to deliver a verdict on a people, but now he was the custodian of a truth that could shatter the hegemony itself. He had to make a report to Marshal Korvac, a report that now had to contain the apocalypse. He had no idea what he would say, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The judgment of the hegemony was no longer the most terrifying threat this world faced. The ascent from the Arcadia's core was a silent, somber pilgrimage. The truth they had unearthed was a shroud, heavier and colder than the metallic air of the ship's tomb. Kyle walked with his head bowed, the crystal spear in his hand, now feeling less like a weapon and more like a relic from a forgotten age. Ilara's face was a mask of stoic grief. The lines around her eyes deepened by the weight of 150 years of lies. They emerged from the ship's hull into the dim, bruised twilight of the canyon, and the world outside felt different. The soft hum of the crystals was no longer a gentle song, but a pained murmur. The wind howling through the spires was not a lament for the past, but a warning for the immediate, terrifying future. The countdown timer Warden had given them was a ghost in Silas's vision, a constant, flickering reminder that every second was a grain of sand slipping through the neck of an hourglass. He had a duty to report, a marshal to answer to, a life to forfeit if he failed. But the hegemony's threats felt distant, almost trivial, when measured against the absolute finality of a world tearing itself apart. He retreated to the Stygian drift, sealing the cockpit and immersing himself in the sterile quiet. He needed to think, to untangle the knot of duty, morality, and survival. He brought up a secure comms channel, the link to Marshal Korvac, a single, ominous icon on his screen. His orders were clear: transmit conclusive findings. The findings were apocalyptic. He could tell the truth that Project Chimera was an act of cosmic hubris, that the hegemony had awakened and mortally wounded a planetary intelligence, and that the world and everyone on it were doomed. Such a report would send shockwaves through the hegemony. The scandal would be immense, a stain on the pristine image of an infallible empire. The sector would be quarantined, not with a veil, but with a fleet so vast it would blot out the stars, ensuring no evidence, no witness, ever escaped. It was a death sentence for the colonists, and likely for him as well, for being the messenger of such a toxic truth. Or he could lie. He could fabricate a report that painted the colonists as a dangerously mutated, unstable population, a threat that had somehow sabotaged their own world. He could recommend immediate sterilization, not to hide a mistake, but to contain a fictional threat. This was the path of self-preservation. Korvac would get the justification he wanted. The cleansing fleets would arrive, and Silas might, just might, be allowed to fly away and forget this place ever existed. But he would be condemning Ilara, Kale, and all their people to a swift, fiery end, murdered to cover a lie. He stared out at the settlement, at the faint lights that were a testament to a resilience he was now tasked with betraying. His finger hovered over the comms link, the choice of physical weight in his chest. Then, the decision was made for him. A proximity alert shrieked through his cockpit, violent and shrill. His long-range sensors, passive until now, lit up with a contact. One contact, moving fast, on a direct burn for the planet. It was small, its energy signature unlike any hegemony vessel he knew. It was sleek, black, and predatory. A ship built for speed and silence. It wasn't a cleansing fleet. It was an assassin. Korvac hadn't been waiting for a report. He had been waiting for a location. The 72 hours weren't for observation. They were a grace period for the executioner to arrive. The ship was already entering the upper atmosphere, its stealth systems making it a ghost to all but his own military-grade sensors. He had been played. He was not the auditor. He was the Judas Goat. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm him, but his training kicked in. He slammed his fist on the console, not in anger, but to activate an emergency broadcast sequence. He bypassed the hegemony channels, routing a signal through his ship's civilian band comms, amplifying it through the Arcadia's ancient, powerful comms dish. A desperate shot in the dark. Ilara Kyle, you have an inbound hostile, single vessel, stealth configuration. It's not a fleet. It's a scalpel. They're coming to cut the loose end. And that's me. Get your people underground. Now, he didn't wait for a reply. He fired up the Stygian Drift's engines, the reclamation vessel groaning in protest as he pushed it into a combat-ready state it was never designed for. It was a hauler, a garbage scow, armed with only a pair of light particle cannons for asteroid defense. The ship descending from the heavens was a wolf, and he was, at best, a sheep with a sharpened stick. The black ship broke through the yellow clouds, a sliver of obsidian against the bruised sky. It ignored the settlement entirely. Its course locked on his position. It fired without warning, a lance of coherent plasma that sliced through the air, missing his ship by meters, but turning the rocky mesa he was on into molten glass. Silas wrenched the Stygian Drift into the air, the ship shuddering as he dodged a second blast. His tactical display identified the attacker, a Spectre-class infiltrator, a ghost ship used by the hegemony's most covert Black Ops division. It was impossibly fast, impossibly agile. His ship was a lumbering beast by comparison. Another plasma bolt grazed his port engine nacelle, and alarms screamed through the cockpit. He was outmatched, outgunned, and utterly alone. He dove into the canyon, the only place he could hope to break the Spectre's weapon lock. He flew with a madman's desperation, weaving between the colossal crystal spires, their internal light flashing past his viewport like strobe lights at the end of the world. The Spectre followed, its smaller frame allowing it to navigate the treacherous terrain with terrifying ease. Below, he could see the colonists scrambling, Kyle and Ilara directing them into the deep caverns they used as shelters during the Cascades. They were saving themselves because he had warned them. It was a small, fleeting victory in a battle he was about to lose. He needed a plan, an edge, something the Spectre's pilot wouldn't anticipate. And then he remembered Ilara's words, "You think like the storm." He remembered the resonance cascade, the hum of the crystals, the way Kale's spear and his pulse pistol had shattered a spire. The planet itself was a weapon. If you knew how to pull the trigger, he opened a channel to the Arcadia. "Warden." "Are you there? I am here." "Auditor." The calm voice replied, a strange anchor in the chaos. "I need you to do something for me. I am transmitting a series of coordinates, key harmonic points along these canyon walls. I also need you to tap into the ship's old sonic geological survey emitters. What's left of them anyway? Can you broadcast a specific, focused frequency if I give it to you? The emitters are damaged, but functional at close range." Warden replied, "Broadcasting a focused frequency is within my capabilities. May I inquire as to your objective? I'm going to sing this world a song." Silas grunted, banking hard to avoid another plasma bolt that vaporized a section of canyon wall behind him. "And I'm going to bring the house down." He sent the data. A desperate, insane plan formulated in the heat of battle. He flew a weaving, suicidal pattern through the narrowest part of the canyon, forcing the Spectre to follow him into the trap. The black ship was right on his tail, its pilot confident, toying with him. Now, Warden Silas screamed from the skeletal remains of the Arcadia, a focused beam of sonic energy, invisible and silent, lanced out, striking the first coordinate point on the canyon wall. Silas, simultaneously, fired his own particle cannons at a second point. The combined frequencies, the high-energy particle stream, and the low-frequency sonic pulse, created a harmonic dissonance, a vibration that hit the planet's crystalline structure like a hammer hitting a tuning fork. The world screamed. A resonance cascade, not born of the planet's dying heart, but artificially induced, focused, and weaponized. The canyon walls began to vibrate violently, the light within the crystal shifting from a soft glow to a blinding, angry crimson. The Spectre pilot, caught completely by surprise, tried to pull up, but it was too late. The very space around the ship was vibrating. Giant shards of crystal, some as large as his own vessel, began to shear off the canyon walls, turning the narrow passage into a meat grinder of stone and light. The Spectre dodged one, then two, but was struck by a third, the impact crumpling its port wing. Alarms it had never expected to hear likely shrieked in its cockpit. Silas pushed his own damaged engines to their breaking point, pulling up and out of the collapsing canyon just as the cascade reached its peak. He looked back. The Spectre, crippled and disoriented, was overwhelmed. The canyon walls collapsed inward, burying the assassin ship under millions, oftens of glowing, energized rock in a final, deafening roar. Silas hovered above the dust cloud, his ship bleeding atmosphere, his console a Christmas tree of red alerts. He had won. He had survived. But the cost was immense. He had triggered a cascade, further wounding the dying planet. He looked at the countdown clock projected in his mind. The final world-ending event was now closer, its arrival accelerated by his desperate act. He had saved the colony from the hegemony's assassin, but in doing so, he had pushed them all one giant step closer to oblivion. The victory was a ghost, haunting the silence that followed the Cascade's roar. Silas's ship, the Stygian Drift, limped back to the mesa, its hull scorched, its port engine sputtering sparks of protest. He emerged from the cockpit not as a triumphant warrior, but as a man who had just signed a death warrant. He had saved them from the hegemony's blade, only to push them closer to the planet's grinding teeth. Below, the colonists were emerging from the caverns, their faces etched with a new kind of fear. The ground beneath their feet was no longer just their home. It was the shell of a bomb, and he had just helped to shorten the fuse. Kale was the first to meet him, his spear slung over his back. The raw hostility in his eyes was gone, replaced by a grim, harrowing respect. "The ship is gone," Kyle stated, looking at the mountain of fresh rubble that choked the canyon. "You killed it. I used the planet's own anger against it," Silas corrected, his voice raspy. It was a temporary solution to a permanent problem. Alara joined them, her gaze sweeping over the fresh destruction before settling on Silas. "Warden's projections have updated," she said, her voice heavy. "The cascade you triggered has destabilized the heart's decay. The final event. It is no longer weeks away. It is days, perhaps less." The three of them stood in the command deck of the Arcadia, the holographic projection of the dying planet hanging between them like a specter. Warden's calm, synthetic voice laid out the brutal mathematics of their extinction. The cleansing fleet was an irrelevant threat now. They would die long before it arrived. "There is no escape," Kyle said, the words tasting like defeat. "The Stygian Drift can't carry us all, and even if it could, it doesn't have the range to clear the blast radius before this world comes apart." Silas stared at the projection, his mind racing, cycling through every protocol, every piece of forgotten hegemony tech he had ever studied. Evacuation was impossible. Fighting was pointless. But there was a third option, buried in the realm of the insane. "Warden," he said, turning to the glowing data core, "the Arcadia's FTL drive. What is its status?" "The hyperspatial manifold is offline," the AI replied. "The primary fusion core that powered it was destroyed in the crash." "The system is a dead shell." "Auditor." "But is it intact?" Silas pressed, a frantic energy in his voice. "The manifold itself, the quantum tunneling capacitors, are the components physically whole?" "Affirmative. The components are undamaged but unpowered. It would require a power source equivalent to a small star to bring the drive online, even for a single jump." A wild, desperate idea began to crystallize in Silas's mind, a plan forged from the logic of a bureaucrat and the madness of a cornered animal. "We have a power source," he said softly, looking at the holographic planet. "We have a dying god beneath our feet." Alara and Kyle stared at him. "You want to plug our ship into the planet's heart?" Kale asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and awe. "It's insane. It's our only chance," Silas countered, his eyes blazing with a feverish light. "Warden, is it theoretically possible to bypass the shattered fusion core and channel energy directly from the planet's geothermal vents into the FTL drive, use the final cataclysmic energy surge of the heart's death throw, as the ignition for a single, blind FTL jump along silence from the AI followed. The blue light pulsed, processing a query it was never designed to contemplate. The theory is unprecedented, Warden finally stated, a hint of what might be called wonder in its synthetic voice. The energy required is immense and dangerously unstable. It would be less a controlled jump and more of a symbiotic detonation. We would have to perfectly synchronize the drive's activation with the planet's final cascade. If we are a second too early, the drive will fail. A second too late, and we will be consumed. The probability of success is less than 7%. 7% is not zero, Alara said, her voice ringing with newfound resolve. She turned to Kyle, her gray eyes clear and sharp. It is a better death than waiting in a cave for the sky to fall. We will do it. What followed was a frenzy of desperate, brilliant creation. The entire colony mobilized, their purpose singular and absolute. Under Silas's and Warden's guidance, they became a single, functioning machine. Kale led teams into the deepest, most unstable geothermal vents, planting massive, conductive crystalline rods salvaged from the canyon walls, creating a crude but effective network to channel the planet's agony. Others worked within the Arcadia, tearing out dead systems, rerouting power conduits, and reinforcing the ship's ancient spine. Silas became something he never thought he would be: a leader. He worked side by side with the colonists, his hegemony knowledge of hyperspatial mechanics merging with their intuitive understanding of the planet's geology. He was no longer Auditor Silas. He was just Silas, a man trying to outrun the apocalypse with nothing but a broken ship and a 7% chance. The planet groaned around them, a constant reminder of their deadline. Smaller cascades shook the canyon almost hourly. The silver rivers boiled, and the air grew thick with a charged, electric scent. They had less than 48 hours. Then, the wolf returned to the door. A new alert flashed on the Stygian Drift's console. A massive fleet had just translated from hyperspace at the edge of the system. Marshal Korvac had not waited for a second failure. He had sent the fire. Dozens of ships, their forms cold and efficient, began to move into orbital positions. Their message was clear, broadcast on all channels. Surrender the fugitive Auditor Silas and prepare for sterilization. You have 1 hour. Kyle stood beside Silas on the Arcadia's bridge, watching the icons of the hegemony fleet fill the tactical display. They are here. They are too late, Silas said, his voice grim. He looked at the frantic work still happening in the engine room. We are not ready. We need more time. Kyle gripped the hilt of his spear. Then I will buy you that time. He turned and left the bridge, his voice echoing through the settlement's comm system. To arms, the sky belongs to the hegemony, but the ground is ours. We show them how the children of the storm greet their executioners. The battle was a slaughter, but it was a magnificent one. The colonists couldn't fight the ships in orbit, but they could fight the first wave of ground troops and assault drones that descended into the canyon. Using the terrain, their knowledge of the crystal's resonant properties, and a ferocity born of utter desperation, they held the line. Kyle was a whirlwind of defiant fury, his small band of fighters using hit-and-run tactics, turning the canyon into a death trap. They fought and died to buy minutes, seconds, for the impossible work being done in the belly of the ship. In the engineering core, Alara stood before the main energy conduit, a massive, hastily constructed interface of scavenged metal and crystal. It was her role to be the final connection to guide the planet's death rattle into the ship's heart. She placed her hands on a crystalline node, closing her eyes, reaching out with a sense that was more than hearing, more than touch. She was speaking to the world, a prayer whispered to a dying god, asking for one last gift. "We are your children," she murmured, as the ground began to shake with the final, unstoppable cascade. "Let us carry your memory to new stars." On the bridge, Silas watched the energy levels surge, redlining every system. Now, Elara. Now he roared into the comms. Outside, the world was coming apart. The sky turned white, the crystal spires disintegrated into pure light, and the ground split open. The hegemony ships in low orbit were torn apart by the geological upheaval. As the wave of absolute annihilation rushed toward them, Elara screamed, and the full, unimaginable power of a dying world surged into the Arcadia. For a single, eternal moment, the ancient colony ship shone brighter than a sun. Then, with a sound that was not a sound, it vanished. The FTL drive, powered by a planet's soul, had not just jumped through space, it had punched a hole through reality itself. The hegemony fleet, what was left of it, arrived to find nothing. No planet, no ship, no survivors. Just a new, vibrant nebula where X-734 used to be, and a gaping, unexplainable void in their understanding of the universe. Far away, in an uncharted system orbiting a young, yellow sun, a ship fell out of hyperspace. The Arcadia drifted, scarred and silent, but whole. On its bridge, Silas slowly picked himself up, his body bruised but alive. He looked out the viewport at a blue-green world, a world of gentle clouds and calm oceans. Kale and Elara joined him, their faces reflecting the light of a new dawn. They were adrift, alone, their past erased, their future a blank page. They had lost their home, but they had won their freedom. Silas looked at the faces of the children of the storm, no longer ghosts on a dying world, but founders of a new one. His audit was finally complete. The asset was not sterile. It was free, and so was he.